Ian, give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Ian, give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. They can't hear me. Try turning on the mic.
I can hear you, Prabhu.
Ian, Kim apparently can hear. Now you can hear me? Okay, we're good. All right. Well, today is Purnima. Purnima is the full moon day. So I never learned this until I became a devotee, but the moon has a waxing cycle where it gets bigger, has a waning cycle where it gets smaller, and the growing of the moon takes 15 days, and its shrinking takes 15 days. And so a month, roughly a month is a unit of measurement that you would get just from like living on the planet and looking around. So a 2-week period is something you would note. The 1-week period of time doesn't really correspond to any natural phenomena. The Jewish 1-week unit of measurement of time is fairly arbitrary because it doesn't correspond to any astrological or any natural phenomena. So, a day and a night, a day, that makes a lot of sense. A fortnight, 2 weeks, 15 days, makes a lot of sense because it's the time it takes for the moon to get full or the time it takes for the moon to get small or non-existent. There's actually a dark moon night where there's no moon whatsoever. And then a month makes sense because a month is the amount of time it takes for the moon to enjoy a full cycle. Where a full moon will disappear and then become full again. That takes 1 month. And a year is, one changing of the seasons and one trip around the sun. And it's a full, that also makes a lot of sense. So Purnima is a lunar calculation. It's part of the calculating of time based on the movements of the moon. Whereas the year is a solar calculation, but it's also 12 months, just a little over 12 months. Because the Vedic calendar is done according to a lunar time, then every so many years, every 5 years or 7 years, they have to add an extra month. And that corrects the calendar, which would otherwise go off. We correct our calendar with leap years, a little bit more of an exact solar calendar, but we lose the lunar calendar, so much so that, in my early life, before I became a devotee, and maybe even for a few years after I became a devotee, I didn't even know about the lunar way of calculating things. But it's useful, and it's in a lot of ways the source of our months that make up our year and our fortnights, which eventually gets cut in half and becomes a week, which is based on the Bible. Anyway, so it's Balaram Purnima, the full moon day, celebrating the appearance of Balaram in this world. Traditionally, Brahmin men, change their thread on this day. I'm not aware of any shastra about that, but it's a tradition amongst Brahmin men to change their Brahmin thread one time a year on this day. That's, of course, based on the idea that your thread never becomes frayed or none of the strands in it become broken. You see Hindu Brahmin men or Vaishnava Brahmin men wear a thread across their body from their left shoulder across their body. And it ritually provides much of the same function that a chadar does. A top cloth, also known as an uttariya, top cloth does. Allowing in warmer climates, such as in South India, for the men to go without a chadar. They're mandated to wear a chadar when they're on the altar, but in South India it gets very, very hot, so they wrap their chadar around their waist, and that Brahman thread across their body plays the role of a chadar. There's different ways of doing it. Generally, threads, 3-stranded threads for a total of 6 strands, but it's actually in 2 groups of 3 strands. In some communities, the second set of 3 stands in for the Brahman's wife, so he's wearing a cloth on his behalf and on behalf of his wife. Sometimes a brahmachari will wear 3 strands, a grihastha will wear 6, a vanaprastha, a retired householder, will wear 9, and a sannyasi 12. But anyway, the tradition is that you change your thread on this day. Strangely, I was getting a massage today, and my massage therapist, a nice gentleman, he said, "Hey, how often do you change that thread?" He's not a devotee. And I've been seeing him for many years. Somehow, strangely, today he said, "How often do you change your thread?" And I said, I change it once a year. And today is that day. I'd forgotten completely about changing my thread on Balaram Purnima. And just today he said to me, "Hey." And he asked me this question. I was like, wow. And I started to try and quantify the odds of that happening. You know, it's a few things. Number one, it's like one day in a year. So that's 1 out of 365. So you're like 1/3%, right? But then there's also that I only see him, once a week or once a fortnight, and so then there's that number has to be quantified in there somewhere. And then there's also just the sheer unusualness of asking the question in the first place, which has to be kind of like 1 in a million, you know what I mean? Because it's not a question like about the thread. It's like, how often do you change it? It's a very unusual question. So that's got to be like 1 in a million. And then he'd have to show up on that day. You know what I mean? It's like a really, I felt inspired, I was like, wow, that's far out. So anyway, then I changed my thread. I changed my thread like an hour later. And there's a process. You wash the new thread, you put it on with the old thread. Generally, I just take bath, put the new thread on, and then bathe with the new thread on. And then you get out, and then you chant Gayatri, the 7 mantras that were given when we take initiation the second time. And then you chant your Gayatri with both threads on, transferring the mantra from one thread to the other, and then you take off the older thread, either by taking it off going downward, so you don't take it off over your head, but you take it off by taking it down off of your body, or you cut it off of your body after you chanted your new mantra. I generally don't cut your Brahman thread unless you curse somebody. You don't cut your Brahman thread. You don't ever want to see your Brahman thread get cut. And so if a Brahmin curses somebody, the way they utter their curse is they rip their thread off their body, like violently pulling the thread off their body. So I don't ever cut my thread. And so I take the thread off my lower body. I take it off lower. And then you burn it. You dispose of it properly. You burn it. It's a little ritual that we do. Prabhupada, of course, is famous. One time he was giving a lecture, and the microphone, the devotees in Hong Kong, where Prabhupada was lecturing, the microphone was like messed up. It was kind of flopping all the time, which is a real rookie mistake. And so they tried to fix the mic a couple times, and Prabhupada just took off his thread and tied the mic up and gave his lecture. And so, ever the utilitarian, Prabhupada showed, how unattached we were. Generally in Vaishnava culture, in our tradition, our Gaudiya tradition, when you become a renunciate, you take off your thread. You give up your thread. Because Vaishnavas are supposed to be above and beyond caste distinctions. And so, somehow the way our movement runs from the time of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, Prabhupada's guru, is if you want to join their mission, you had to take off your thread and give up your idea that you were a Brahmin. So, which was a big deal, because if you were from a Brahmin family, that thread was given to you in a ceremony, usually conducted when you were 8 years old. And that sacred upavit, that sacred ceremony, was like a really important rite of passage for a priest at a young age, when you began chanting the first of the 7 Gayatri mantras we get. And it was part of the beginning of your education. It was a very important ceremony. And so we demanded that people give up their caste to join our movement. Then when they were initiated, then we gave them the thread back, because they became a Brahmin in our tradition. Normally, becoming a Vaishnava means you give up caste distinctions, you would give up your thread, but you would never put it back on. But Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati wanted to teach the world that a Vaishnava was automatically a Brahmin, that a devotee was automatically a priest, and so he would give the Brahmin thread back. And then you would wear that, and our sannyasis still wear their Brahmin threads, they don't give them up. Babaji, which is a particular type of initiation where you renounce everything, similar to sannyas. In that ceremony, you give up your Brahmin thread. Anyway, this is just, it's a bit of a tangent, but it happened, it was a strange and serendipitous occasion that occurred today. And so I thought I'd discuss it a little bit. And the thread is often thought of as being the same way that Ananta, the snake, encircles Vishnu and protects him. Similarly, the thread encircles and protects the devotee. And so I'm assuming, like I said, there's no scripture, but the idea is that the Ananta is, like Kunda means, Kundala means circle in Sanskrit. And so Kundalin means that which possesses a circle, a snake. Kundalini is a feminine snake, and that's where you get the word Kundalini from. It's the snake power of Kundalini yoga, and so that's where it comes from. And so a snake encircles, it's a circle, and so the Brahmin thread is a circle, it's white, and somehow that became associated with Balaram. Not somehow, it's pretty easy to trace out the connections. They're relatively easy to see. And so it's tradition to change your thread on Balaram Purnima. Purnimas are like, they're happy days. The moon's out, full moon. It's very pleasant to be out on Purnima. The sky's lit up. It's like a street light in the sky. The whole night becomes lit up. On Purnima, Krishna and Radharani, they wear white. So they blend into the moonlight when they sneak out of their homes to go and perform the Ras Leela. And then on a dark moon night, then on those nights they wear dark colors so that they blend into the darkness. And Purnima is what signifies the beginning of Chaturmas, or the end of Chaturmas, or the beginning of Kartik, or the end of Kartik. So it's the Purnima. It's also the day I feel a little embarrassed, but I was supposed to shave today somehow. It didn't work out. We had the festival and some other stuff happened, but I'm supposed to shave today, and so I'm a little embarrassed, but somehow I didn't pull that off. So in our traditional culture also, we shave once a month. I usually shave once a week, or once every 2 weeks, or once a month. And so somehow, I think this one I went a month. That's why I'm looking kind of grizzly, and but I spaced out and I didn't get it done. And now it's too late. We don't cut our hair after dark. so I can't I'll shave at night. I have to wait till the next day. Anyway, I'm giving you guys like a bunch of male details of our culture you wouldn't otherwise be aware of. And there's limitations to those details as well, as Prabhupada demonstrated when he took off his Brahman thread and used it as a string to tie up the microphone, showing that he wasn't particularly attached. Balaram Balaram's a big figure in the Mahabharata. And he's also a big figure in our Gaudiya culture. There's a few different ways you see Balaram. One of them is that Balaram is Krishna's brother, and he's a prince of the Yadu dynasty. And he is a little angry and wild compared to Krishna. Krishna's a little more thoughtful and even diplomatic. And Balaram was a little more wild and fierce and quick to anger. He was also fiercely loyal to Krishna. And somehow he was friends with Duryodhana, the evil antagonist of the entire Mahabharata. The antagonist. The anti-hero. And one of the names of Balaram is Duryodhana Guru, because he taught Duryodhana how to fight with a club. And being loyal to his disciples, he would side with Duryodhana. In fact, he wanted Duryodhana to marry his sister, Subhadra. And Krishna told Arjuna, who also wanted to marry Subhadra, better you just kidnap her. Like Kshatriyas do that. They kidnap. And so you're allowed to kidnap a girl and just take her and take off. I did it with Rukmini, and so you can do it with Subhadra. Arjuna was on an exile in the Mahabharata. There's a little bit of a complicated history there, but Draupadi accidentally asked Shiva 5 times for a husband, so he gave her 5 husbands, all 5 of the Pandavas, which gets a little freaky. I mean, it's polyamory, or polygamy, really. It's polygamy. Polyamory is loving many different people. Polygamy is marrying them. Bigamy is marrying 2. Polygamy is marrying many. So it was reverse polygamy. And it gets complicated. Like, what do? You got 5 husbands. It's almost like that show Big Love, but reversed times 2. And so she had certain days she would be with certain time periods, and certain time periods she would be with each husband, and the other husbands weren't allowed to disturb that couple while they were together. And Arjuna accidentally came in one day when she was with, I believe it was Yudhishthira Maharaj, his older brother. And so they had a rule: if you walk in on somebody else, then you have to leave for a year. Like you're like in a timeout for a year. So Arjuna had to wander around for a year by himself during the 14-year exile of the Pandavas. And part of his journey took him to Dwarka. And when he got to Dwarka, he met with all the Yadavas, including Krishna, and he saw Subhadra, Krishna's sister. Vasudeva is Krishna's father, really his stepfather. But anyway, Vasudeva is Krishna's father, and he had 2 wives, Devaki and Rohini. And Rohini gave birth to Subhadra. Rohini gave birth to Subhadra. And so Subhadra was Arjuna's, Krishna's half-sister. Or sister. We just call her a sister. So Subhadra was Krishna's sister. From a more ontological viewpoint, Subhadra is Yogamaya. She's the power by which Krishna and Arjuna and all the residents of Vrindavan become bewildered so that they can disport themselves on equal terms and have intimate relationships based on love and not formality. If you knew that God was God, there'd be no chance of embracing God. Thomas Aquinas famously said, the 11th century Catholic theologian, who's more or less responsible for for Catholic theology over the last 1,000 years. He famously said, you can kiss the feet of God, the hand of God, or the lips of God. For a relationship of servitude, or a more intimate relationship, like a friendship, a relationship of fealty, like where you're a serf or you're like a king pledging fealty to an emperor. And then he said you can kiss the lips of God, indicating a romantic relationship, which is ultimately what the whole nun thing is about. They become the brides of Christ. It's a romantic, like, to the nth degree. It's also why Gaudiyas become sannyasis. When they become sannyasis and they give up, they also receive a gopi mantra, an extra mantra. In addition to the 7 mantras we get, they get an extra mantra, which I don't know. I've never looked it up. I know it exists, and I'm sure it's available online on the internet, but I've never looked it up because I want to get it from my guru. If and when I take sannyas, I'll receive it from my guru. But it's a gopi bhav mantra, and so we give up sex life and to become gopis, to become mandris with Krishna, just like nuns give up marriage in order to become married to Krishna. And so in some ways, our renunciation, lifelong vows of celibacy, along with the Catholic order, has a very romantic aspect to it. It's a very high abstract concept for most people, but it's still very romantic. It's having a big enough yes with Krishna that you're able to say no to the material urges that plague people so much. Anyway, Aquinas made this point, that you could kiss the lips of God, and then said, but as far as I'm concerned, I'm kissing God's feet. He admitted, it was just, although he could fathom it, he couldn't really own such an idea. Although he knew such an idea existed, or at least he theorized such a thing could exist, he couldn't really wrap his head around it. And so, I'm sorry, but the noise it's really too much. Did you indicate that it's actually a disturbance? Aquinas admitted his own inability, really, to wear or own that romantic conception of divinity. We have a mechanism woven into our philosophy, into our theology, for how such a miraculous thing occurs, where the soul can fall so much in love with God that they forget his divinity and are able to disport themselves on equal terms. There's a certain, you can't really think that God is God and still want to marry God. It's like he's too great. It's like trying to marry a giant or a mountain or a tidal wave or something like that. It's just too awesome. It's too big. You know what I mean? It's like trying to marry a cloud. It's like abstract, but it's also like trying to marry a giant, someone who's just categorically different than yourself. How does the relationship work? And so to marry a giant, you have to stop thinking of the giant as a giant and start thinking of the giant as being like you. And so Yogamaya is the way in which the devotee forgets Krishna's power in such a way that he's able to relish Krishna's sweetness. And Subhadra is that Yogamaya. And that Yogamaya is also the way that Krishna forgets his own divinity, such that he's able to relish that sweetness, because even God would not be able to intimately love the devotees when considering that they were his ants, his microscopic ants. And so for him to really fall in love, he has to forget his own divinity too. Normally when you look at deities, you like Sitaram, it tells you something about kind of where Krishna's at, or Radha Krishna, or Krishna and Arjuna as a set of deities. It indicates like that there's a fraternal relationship. Krishna Balaram, a fraternal relationship. So one thing is it indicates whether it's a romantic relationship, and romance is really equality with that spice of romance. And then there's also fraternal relationships, same equality. And then there's you're down going up, that's a servitor relationship. And then there's you're up going down, that's when you love Krishna like your child. That's a parental relationship where Krishna is your child. So if you can also, in addition to looking at the relationships just as different categories, you can see them as one is your love is going up, your love is coming down, or your love is equal in two flavors, and that's the four primary relationships. And when you look at sets of deities, you get a sense of kind of what's going on. Like a set of deities will celebrate a pastime, or a series of pastimes, or a particular relationship. So when you look at Jagannath, Baladev, and Subhadra, like what does it communicate? It's like Krishna and his brother Balaram, friend, Vrindavan, but then Subhadra is also in there. And so that communicates more of like a Dwarka type thing, more of a power type thing. And you find, therefore, Jagannath Puri is considered to be Kurukshetra, or Jagannath Puri is considered to be Dwarka, like Dwarka, and Krishna is leaving opulence to go back to Vrindavan, and that's where you get the idea of the Rath Yatra festival from. And we worship Balaram on our altars. And like every big ISKCON temple, there's a deity Baladev. That's Balaram. That's Krishna and Balaram. We have Krishna and Balaram deities at our temples. We have Radha Krishna deities, we have Krishna Balaram deities. Then we're blessed a couple times over. We have 3 deities of Balaram on the altar. He's as much present on the altar as Krishna. I guess 4 times with Krishna because he's Giriraj. And so you've got Jagannath, Giriraj, Chaitanya, and the other small deity of Chaitanya, 4 deities of Krishna, and 3 deities of Balaram is Nityananda twice, and then Baladev. So out of our set of, we got 8, 10 deities of Prabhupada and Bhaktivedanta Saraswati, so we got 12 deities on our altar. Out of those 12 deities, 25% of them are various iterations of Balaram. And for devotees who feel themselves to be in a fraternal relationship with Krishna, Balaram is he's like everything to them. For devotees who conceive of themselves as being cowherd boys, Balaram is everything. His position is in some ways very similar to that of Radharani. Just like for the devotees who think of Krishna in a romantic relationship, Radharani becomes their matriarch. And they consider themselves to be devotees of Radharani above all else. For devotees in a fraternal relationship, Balaram is their hero. Because he's Krishna's actual brother. It's like the fraternal relationship is a brotherly relationship, and Balaram is Krishna's actual brother. Like what could be more set in stone? And so all of the limbs and sublimbs of Balaram become the various cowherd boys. And that's why Nityananda's primary disciples are the Dwadas Gopals, the 12 cowherd boys who loved Krishna in a fraternal way in the Gaudiya tradition, following Nityananda. Balaram has a mix. He has fraternal love for Krishna. He also has some parental love for Krishna. Sometimes Balaram goes to sleep at night, and he has a dream that Krishna is being attacked, and he jumps out of his bed like in a stupor and starts running out the door to protect Krishna, because he has these feelings of protecting and caring for Krishna. He's stronger than Krishna. He's bigger than Krishna. He kills certain demons. Dhenukasur, Pralambasur are killed by Balaram. Krishna doesn't have to kill them. Like Balaram jumps in and takes over. Sometimes Balaram will rest and he'll set his head in Krishna's lap And Krishna will sit there like a servant of his elder brother. And Balaram will take a nap in Krishna's lap. Like, I'm tired. And that's why Krishna will sit down, maybe with his back up against a tree, and Balaram will lay down on Krishna's lap and take a nap. Still Krishna's God, and Balaram is his incarnation, his manifestation, his prakash, his swayam prakash. It's a technical term developed by Rupa Goswami in the Laghu Bhagavatamrita. And so Balaram is Krishna's first manifestation. And he's God, but his skin's white, and he knows that he's derivative of the original source, and therefore he feels himself to be a lover of God, a servant of God, and that's where our serving propensity comes from Balaram. From another angle, Radharani is that eternal counterform. And really, we say first manifestation, but that indicates a conception within time, but these are manifestations beyond time, and therefore they're eternal realities. But Balaram represents that servitor God, in many ways akin to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. In many ways, a precursor to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And so to establish the ontology of Krishna still being the supreme, one day Balaram said, Krishna, I want to, what's up with your flute? You play your flute, everybody comes running. The flute is Krishna's weapon of seduction. Most deities have a weapon like a sword or this. Sometimes, Kali has she has an axe, and she wears the severed skulls of demons, and she has aborted fetuses as her earrings, a skirt made out of arms. You look at the deity of Kali, it's like, geez, man. And even Durga has, 10 arms all filled with different weapons. When you look at Vishnu, you get kind of a combo. It's like there's a couple of blessing elements, the conch shell and the lotus, and then you get a couple of weapons, the chakra and the club. But with Krishna, he's got 2 arms. He doesn't have 4 arms. He's not even showing you he's God. He's got 2 arms. So much more intimate. And he's carrying a flute. And what does he do? He plays the 5th note on the flute. The 5th note is like pa in Sanskrit. Do, re, mi, fa, so in English Western theory, and pa in Sanskrit musical theory. It's a transition, anyway, between the lower notes and the upper notes, and it's got a very it plays an important role as you start to kind of move forward in musical progression between the low parts and the high parts. It plays a real connective role, and it's a very entrancing and intriguing as the music starts to pick up tempo and you start to raise up through the scale. So when Krishna hits the 5th note on his flute, everybody goes wild, and they flock to Krishna like a Pied Piper. And so Krishna's weapon isn't a weapon at all. It's a musical instrument, and it's if it is a weapon, it's a weapon of seduction. He intrigues and entices the living entities by calling out to them. So Balaram was like, what's the deal with your flute, And so Krishna loaned Balaram his flute. Hey, you carry my flute for a day, no problem. And so Balaram tucked the flute in his sash. Nityananda is wearing a flute today, if you haven't noticed. Did you guys notice? Oh, come on. Take a serious look at the deities. Nityananda on his right side, your left, you can see he's got a buffalo horn on the right side, like Balaram. He's got a flute. We only do that a couple days a year, like a Janmashtami and a Balaram Purnima, sometimes maybe a Gaur Purnima, or maybe a Nityananda Trayodasi. Maybe 4 times a year we do that. It's very, very rare. We've got the flute and the buffalo horn, really honoring Nityananda's connection to Balaram. I mean, in my best of all possible worlds, the deities would be dressed this opulently every day. Every day would be a festival, and we decorate the altar with flowers from our gardens like we have here, and fruits and the extra accoutrements on the deities. But so Balaram tucked the flute in a sash and started like sauntering about Vrindavan, feeling like he was the king of Vrindavan with Krishna's flute. But then a demon came, and it was Keshi. Keshi came and had been told, "How do I recognize Krishna?" The horse demon, and Kamsa said, "Oh, you'll recognize Krishna because he's got a flute." So Keshi came storming into Vrindavan in this fierce, huge Lucifer, if you're familiar with the Denver airport, like form. And there's a blue statue called Lucifer. It's a huge blue horse with fiery lit up eyes that's at the Denver airport. It was made by some famous artist. And while he was sculpting the head, it's a huge statue, it fell on him and killed him. And somehow they still installed the deity, or the statue, in the Denver airport. Now the Denver airport's like a source of all these conspiracy theories. And the statue is colloquially known as Lucifer to people in the Denver area. So anyway, he came storming into Vrindavan in a Lucifer-like form, saw Balaram wearing his flute, and ran up to him and kicked him. Balaram flew, some great, humongous distance, and came back to Krishna totally disheveled. And he had a couple other bad experiences that day, and came back to Krishna like disheveled. It's like, "Here, I don't want your flute." Like, okay, and so that story is there as a counterbalance to the really intimate relationship where Balaram even seems to be above God. I mean, but even in Vrindavan, even the devotee is above God. The devotees eat Krishna's meal, eat Krishna's lunch every day. The cowherd boys go out to eat with Krishna. This is Prabhupada told the story. I've never found it in any Shastra. When the cowherd boys go out to eat with Krishna, they all take their lunch boxes, or as Prabhupada said, their tiffins. I don't imagine they had anything resembling the Indian tiffin. Nobody has tiffins anymore, but when I was growing up, I bought a tiffin, like when I was 16 years old, because Prabhupada had a tiffin, and it was like the coolest thing ever. So a tiffin it's a large, like almost like a little pot, like about this big, but it's totally, there's no handle on it, stainless steel. And then there's another one that fits into it. So the bottom of this one fits into the rim of this one. And then the next one is, hold on, somebody, Narayan sent me an image, which I want to click on. You're so funny. And so the tiffin it's this, and then the next one fits into it. So the bottom of this one has a slightly narrowed edge, and then the top has a slightly. And so there's three of them. They fit on top of one another, and then there's a large metal contraption that like acts as a handle, and you can carry all of them around. But you could also cook on them. Probably used to cook in his tiffin, and you can stack them when you're cooking. You can stack them when you're cooking. So you can start by cooking, your dal is in the bottom one, and then your vegetables go in the next one up, because they take less time to cook, and your rice goes in the top one, or vice versa. I think actually your rice is in the second one, and your vegetables in the top one. And they can all heat up, and you can cook on them. And then you can also put them back together and carry them around. You have your lunch with you. You carry your lunch around. Actually, Brahmins, as long as we're talking about Brahmins, and I'm on a roll, Brahmins traditionally would not allow anyone to cook for them. And so when they stopped being priests and had to take jobs, they would take a tiffin with them and a stove, and they would cook for themselves during lunchtime because they wouldn't eat food cooked by anybody else, including their wives. It used to be that Brahmin men would not eat food cooked by anybody else except for themselves. They only cook their own food. Nowadays it's quite common. You'll find a Brahmin will only eat food cooked by himself or by his wife, but in the old days they would only eat food cooked by themselves. And they had to have fresh cooked food, and so they would take a tiffin with them to work, and they would cook for themselves at work. during their lunch break. And never go out and eat at restaurants. Somebody just said, I want to take you and your wife out for a meal. A devotee said, I want to take you and your wife out to a restaurant for a meal. And he said, if you eat out, if you do such things. Like, he wasn't sure. He was guessing I ate at restaurants. But he at least gave the nod, like, maybe you don't. Because there's a few, wacky devotees who don't eat at restaurants. And I am one of those wacky devotees. And I wrote back, and I'd love you to take me out to it for a meal, but, I don't eat at restaurants. So, but my wife can cook for us, and we can eat together. We can break bread together. Or we could go to my restaurant when some devotee is cooking, and then we could eat there as well. But yeah, it used to be that the men would just cook for themselves every time. So they have a tiffin like this. They probably say that they were carrying their tiffins with them. I'm sure it was some other type of contraption they were using. Like I said, the story, I've only seen it from Prabhupada. Never read it in any Gaudiya literature. So they would get out to eat, and the other cowherd boys were not as rich as Krishna. Krishna's father was Nanda Maharaj. He was the king of Vrindavan. A small king, like a village king. But still, he was the king of Vrindavan. And so they would have rice and dal and sabji, is what Prabhupada said. But Krishna would have kachoris and samosas and puris and all sorts of, and gulab jamans and all sorts of fancy stuff. And when it came time for lunch, Krishna would break out his meal, and he couldn't bear to see the other cowherd boys not eating what he ate. So he would end up giving all of his food away to his boyfriends, to the other cowherd boys. And he would take their food. And so every day in the spiritual world, Krishna's eating rice, dal, and sabji for lunch, and his devotees are eating the opulent food, because that's the nature of Krishna, who's above all things a lover and like a very sweet Lord. My sweet Lord is like a really apropos translation of Krishna. And so in many ways, the devotees are, sometimes the cowherd boys will beat Krishna in a wrestling match. They'll carry him around on their shoulders. And so, in many ways, all the devotees in Vrindavan are above Krishna in some way or another. Because Vrindavan's where Krishna can really fully manifest his love for his devotees. Vrindavan is that highest form of divinity, where all of the hegemonies have been erased. And in fact, it's a reverse hegemony, and Krishna becomes the servant of his devotees. And at the apex of that, in a lot of ways, is Balaram. Above even Krishna's parents. He's considered to be more original. You don't find deities of Nanda Maharaj, who's like an eternally liberated devotee. But Balaram is God himself. But despite that, the ontology is still established. And so you see the ontology established in this pastime with Balaram taking Krishna's flute. Although from a point of view of Ras, Balaram is above Krishna. From a point of view of Tattva, Krishna is above Balaram. And so you find the Leelas end up enhancing and articulating and coloring in and illustrating these special philosophical points. And they, in many ways, like a tiffin, stack on top of one another. And they create a multi-layered conception of divinity. So for cowherd boys, Balaram is the is like their all, their end all and be all. And generally for those devotees, they don't just follow Balaram. Not generally. Those devotees don't just follow Balaram. They'll follow Subal, one of Balaram's servants, a cowherd boy following in the wake of Balaram. And they'll serve that that Vaishnava. And then oftentimes they'll serve a Vaishnava serving a Vaishnava who's serving Subal. And in this way they even create a hierarchy within the spiritual world where they become part of a great chain of service with Balaram at the zenith, but with many rungs, and they seek to be the lowest in those rungs eternally as they serve their gurus in their eternal forms as cowherd boys, or in the same thing is done with gopis. For those in a romantic relationship with Krishna, Balaram is still an important figure. He's Krishna's brother, and they want to join Krishna's family. They want to be servants of, Radharani, who will hopefully one day become Krishna's wife. There's two conceptions of Radharani's relationship. One is married, one is unmarried. Swakiya and Parakiya. But in either case, there's this hope that Radharani and Krishna will become married, which in many ways augments and makes more beautiful and more exciting the pastimes. And so Balaram is then this member of Krishna's family that you want to join. And he still figures very prominently into the lives because you're joining a family. And Balaram is like a respected elder brother of Krishna. Prabhupada established deeds of Krishna and Balaram in his primary temple in Vrindavan, which would indicate that Prabhupada's relationship with Krishna was in a fraternal mood. He established deeds of Gaur Nitai, not too typical. Normally, Bhaktisiddhanta would establish a deity of Mahaprabhu, a single deity of Mahaprabhu, as Radha and Krishna. Prabhupada established Gaur Nitai. Bhaktivinoda Thakur had deities of Gaur Gadadhar, also Radha Krishna, but as Gaur and Gadadhar. Prabhupada was into Gaur Nitai, Krishna Balaram. And in his main temple in Vrindavan, he established straight up deities of Krishna and Balaram. And the place where our temple is established in Vrindavan is a place where the cowherd boys used to herd cows. Raman Reti. And so that would indicate, in the way that traditionally that we look for indications of our Guru's Swarup or his eternal form in the spiritual world, those elements would indicate that Prabhupada had a fraternal relationship. And that he was a follower of Baladev, of Nityananda Prabhu. This disturbs some devotees, some ISKCON devotees. And they approached Srila Sridhar Maharaj, Prabhupada's godbrother, about it. I believe it was in 1981. And they asked him about it. This was 4 years after Prabhupada passed away, 3.5 years after Prabhupada passed away. And Prabhupada's godbrother, Srila Sridhar Maharaj, who was uncommonly and extraordinarily brilliant. So much so that Prabhupada took his counsel. And in many ways was trained up by. They lived together for 12 years. Prabhupada rented some of the rooms in his home, and they made a temple there. And Srila Sridhar Maharaj lived in Calcutta and conducted a Gaudiya Mutt temple in the upper level of Prabhupada's home. That's how close they were. And he was a sannyasi, and Prabhupada was a grihastha, and he had joined the mission before Prabhupada did. He met Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati after Prabhupada, but he joined the mission before Prabhupada. Prabhupada was a married person living outside, and Srila Sridhar Maharaj took sannyas and joined the mission. And so he was Prabhupada's elder in every way, except by age. Except by age, Prabhupada was his elder. So there would have been also some respect there, because Prabhupada was elder to him by age. And so they asked Srila Sridhar Maharaj, like, what are we supposed to do? Prabhupada's a cowherd boy. That seems like a lesser relationship. And then Srila Sridhar Maharaj's disciple, Bhakti Sundar Govinda Maharaj, who eventually became the successor of the Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Mutt, the name of his particular Gaudiya Mutt, his ISKCON. He said Bashur, which means brother-in-law in Bengali. And Srila Sridhar Maharaj then went on to say, yes, he gave a very far-out explanation, which I'm going to share with you guys. And I didn't bother building a theology. I gave some little elements of our theology, but in a lot of ways I just explored our theology instead of building it today. I didn't give you guys all the philosophical ideas that make this reasonable. I just assumed it was reasonable and worked with it. I gave you a few blocks throughout the discussion, but I didn't build through it chronologically. I assumed it and explored it. And so that's what we're going to do now. Srila Sridhar Maharaj gave a very far-out explanation. He said that Prabhupada was empowered by Nityananda Prabhu. And therefore, he was manifesting the symptoms of a cowherd boy. But that might not be who he actually is. Because he had to preach all over the world, which was what Nityananda Prabhu was instructed by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to do, to go back to Bengal and preach to the lower castes and women, so they wouldn't be left out of Mahaprabhu's mercy. He was empowered to do so. And Prabhupada then traveled all over the world and preached to the lower rungs of society, namely the fallen West, who from an Indian viewpoint are the lower rungs of society. I mean, when the king of Jaipur went to visit England, he had a 500-gallon container built so he could bring Ganga Jal with him, so he would never have to bathe in the water of the meat eaters, but could bathe in a sacred river during his entire journey. Even our water was corrupted, the corrupt water of the Western lands. I mean, you want to get into racism, man. The racism of high caste Indians towards the rest of the world is like a thing to behold. But anyway, we should never offend our gurus. One time, somebody offended Nityananda Prabhu and dug up the soil where he was, like as if he contaminated that place by being there. And the result was that the Muslims came to that place and then slaughtered a goat at the person's house and ruined their whole home. We never want to offend our guru. Our guru is a representative of Nityananda Prabhu because Nityananda is a preacher. And because Nityananda is Balaram, then our guru is ultimately a representative of Balaram. And as Balaram is the first person to have this mood of I want to serve Krishna, similarly, therefore, he's the original guru, he's the Adi Guru. And so we never want to offend Balaram, we never want to offend our thread that we wear, we never want to offend our guru. It's the worst thing you can do, and when you do so, it's like the beginning of the end. There's no hope for you. But anyway, Srila Sridhar Maharaj gave this beautiful explanation. He said that Prabhupada was empowered by Nityananda because look how he went all around the world and preached. And therefore he established temples of Gaura-Nitai, and he got swept up in this mood, like Mahaprabhu sometimes would be in a mood of Narasimha. And so he got swept up in this mood. And so, therefore he manifested the symptoms of a cowherd boy. But that might not be who he actually is in the spiritual world. Just like a woman who's married to a man in the presence of the elder brother, who's her brother-in-law, and the elder brother is almost like a second father. So it's almost like your father-in-law, Bashura, a woman in the presence of her elder brother will not behave casually with her husband. She'll hide her romantic feelings with her husband in deference to the mood between the husband and his elder brother. Similarly, Prabhupada, in a romantic relationship with Krishna, in the presence of Balaram, who had to come in order for preaching to occur, may have covered his own sentiments, become wrapped up in Balaram's sentiments, traveled all over the world, manifested the symptoms of a cowherd boy, established deities like this, although he may also have a separate mood that's hidden. And in this way, Srila Sridhar Maharaj created a very beautiful way of honoring all of the elements we saw of indicating Prabhupada's relationship as being fraternal, while also allowing for the possibility of a dual relationship, where Prabhupada had a dual manifestation, like many of our acharyas do. All the Dwadas Gopals, the 12 cowherd boys in Nityananda, they all have a Manjari form as well as a cowherd boy form, a romantic form as well as a fraternal form. And so Srila Sridhar Maharaj paved the way for that conception of Prabhupada, while at the same time honoring. One time they made a shirt for Prabhupada, this was in 1967, when Prabhupada was in San Francisco. They made a shirt for him, with mother of pearl buttons, like a full-blown Western, like a Western shirt, like a button-up Western shirt. Prabhupada rocked it with his Uttariya. It's just out of this world. It's like back in the early days where devotees, Prabhupada would reciprocate with these devotees' sentiments that were just bizarre. They made him a kurta, which was actually like a Western style, like a Levi's shirt. And they said, Prabhupada, you look like a cowherd boy. And Prabhupada said, I am a cowherd boy. And so there are these little vignettes from Prabhupada's life which indicated he was wrapped up in a mood of fraternity with Krishna. And they became less as the Hare Krishna movement became more popular. But in the early days, there were small vignettes like this that were very, very special. And so Srila Sridhar Maharaj reconciled them shortly after Prabhupada's passing and offered a way in which we could sort of honor that very, very pronounced fraternal mood that was there in Prabhupada's preaching and the way he set up his deities and so on and so forth. To give you an idea about this stuff, Keshav Maharaj, that is Prabhupada's godbrother, whose disciple Srila Narayan Maharaj became a very famous devotee in the 90s and early 2000s. Very, very well known. Keshav Maharaj, who was Prabhupada's godbrother, who actually gave Prabhupada sannyas. His altar was a very specific color of green marble. And he told his disciples, that's my color in the spiritual world. Therefore I've made the marble. So these things, looking how a devotee worships, looking at the mood of their worship, seeing very, very sensitively their particular mood of worship and what they're constructed of in this world, and not getting caught up on externals, but looking for some indication. There's always some manifestation. There's always some manifestation. It may not be, it's a little twisted like a snake. It's a little twisted. It's not always so straightforward how to recognize it. But there's always some indication of the relationship with Krishna that the great Vaishnava has for those who are sensitive. Actually, Prabhupada mentioned one time in the Chaitanya Charitamrita that when devotees in a fraternal relationship with Krishna get Mahaprabhu's full mercy, they also become immersed in a romantic relationship by Mahaprabhu's grace. There's that statement in the Chaitanya Charitamrita itself, in one of Prabhupada's purports. And that statement actually came from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, his guru. It's hidden in there. It's like a little rare gem. And so this points to even a relationship with Balaram as a requirement to evolve into a relationship, and with Nityananda, to evolve into a relationship when we can actually appreciate Radha and Krishna. I have a proof text for that as well, but we're going to skip it because we're out of time. Thank you very much on IGTV. And also thank you very much